Everybody ready? Oh, yeah. Are we ready to begin? Awesome, awesome, awesome. How lovely. How lovely is it that we can gather here on the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples before the Bard season even kicks off. And it is an auspicious day for us at Bard because the site crew began work at Sanok today. And they worked so hard on that monumental task of building our theaters and our facilities for our festival season. So that is exciting. One of those facilities, as you may know, is the BMO main stage. And as you may have noticed, we are in the BMO Theatre Centre. So just a moment to thank BMO for their support. We're so grateful. Now, theatre, of course, is all about collaboration and community. And so I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that and acknowledge everyone that's part of that. Sponsors, members, donors, many of you are here this evening. All of the many artists, artisans, technicians, and administrators who pour their efforts into this great collective, and of course, our audiences. Everyone's contributions make a difference, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your support and for your participation. Now, I want to introduce ourselves. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Hartman. I'm Director of Education at Bard on the Beach. And Bard Education operates all year round and all throughout the community. We have programs for schools, for youth, and for adults, and we invite everyone who'd like to join us to come and play and explore and create together. And what we are most interested in is we want people to discover how Shakespeare resonates for you, all of the different ways based on who you are. We want to celebrate that, and we want to celebrate your humanity. That's what it's all about for us. So this evening is part of that exploration. As we look at the different ways Shakespeare resonates for us today, not just the delightful parts, because yeah, there are a lot of delightful parts, but we also want to take a look at some of the stuff that isn't quite as delightful, that maybe is a little less comfortable. And we want to challenge some things, because that's fun too. Because we want to reconcile those things, and we want to explore how Shakespeare can still hold the mirror up to who we are today. Because it's not the same as who we were when Shakespeare was writing and where Shakespeare was writing. So, we have some fantastic contributors to this conversation, and I am delighted to introduce them. And I'll start to my left here with the lovely Rhonda Arab, who joins us from Simon Fraser University. Her research interests include the intersections of class, gender, and work on the early modern English stage, and the role of literature and theater in the construction of cultural discourse and social practice. She's the author of Manly Mechanicals on the Early Modern English Stage, and The Bonds of Love and Friendship in Early Modern English Literature. And she's co-editor of Historical Affects and the Early Modern Theatre and Intersections of Class in Early Modern English Drama. I was also delighted, I asked the panelists to give me a fun fact about them as well, and I was delighted to hear that Rhonda has a whopping 33 first cousins. Welcome, Rhonda.
I know, it's a lot, right?
And moving in this direction, we have Dennis Britton, who joins us from the University of British Columbia, where he researches and teaches early modern English literature. His work includes a focus on the history of race, critical race theory, Protestant theology, and the history of emotion. Fascinated by that one. All of it, but that one just really went, ooh. He's currently working on 2 books, Shakespeare and Pity, Feeling Difference on the Early Modern English Stage, and Reforming Ethiopia, African Anglo Relations in Protestant England. And when I asked Dennis for a fun fact about him, he shared that if he could choose a career other than English professor, he would want to run a pie shop. And isn't that fun on Pie Day? Welcome, Dennis. And sitting next to me is Jivesh Parasram. And Jivesh is directing Bard's upcoming production of Measure for Measure, which, in his own words, he has freely and absurdly adapted. And I can't wait. Jiv is an award-winning and internationally recognized theater maker and cultural leader whose work centers decolonization through aesthetics. He's the founding artistic producer of Pandemic Theatre, and he became the artistic director of Rumble Theatre, following 3 years as the associate artistic producer of Theatre Pass Mirai. Close enough?
Yeah, that's actually how it's pronounced.
Great. My French is a little rusty. He was a member of the Cultural Leader Lab with the Banff Centre and the Toronto Arts Council, and his public service work has included collaborations with the Ad Hoc Assembly, the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and as an advisor to the National Arts Centre. And Jiv's fun fact is he has double-jointed thumbs. Welcome, Jiv. So what we thought we'd do this evening is, I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists. So we're going to spend a bit of time on that. And in about half an hour-ish, we'll turn it over to questions from you. And then we'll wrap things up. We're going to aim to finish at around 8:30. I suddenly forgot what time it was. Okay, so I think many of us can agree there's a lot to love about Shakespeare. What's something for each of you that you don't love so much, or even, dare I say, hate about Shakespeare? And I define Shakespeare very broadly here. This can be the body of the plays and poems. It can be the traditions around Shakespeare or approaches to Shakespeare, Shakespeare's place in society, whatever. Who wants to jump in first?
Oh, you guys are looking at me. Okay.
You chose the seat there.
I chose the seat here. Okay. So the thing that annoys me in this, I mean, I could say a few things, but I'm going to talk about the phenomenon of Shakespeare. And I think what bothers me is what gets said all the time about how Shakespeare represents universal values. And now I'm not, I mean, some people have a problem with the concept of universal values, and that's not actually my problem here. I mean, I think there probably are some universal values, but what bothers me about that is that I don't think that we can say Shakespeare represents or presents universal values, because I think what is actually most valuable about Shakespeare is that you can't pin him down. Like, you can't pin down what his view on anything is. So and to me, that's what's most valuable, is the complexity that is presented. So, I mean, just to give, as a simple example, let's look at Henry V. Like, does this present are we supposed to walk away with the universal value of patriotism that the chorus presents? Or are we supposed to walk away, with all the undercutting of patriotism and war that you actually see in the play? And then, of course, in Henry IV, Part 1, we've got Falstaff, who gives this absolutely compelling, fantastic, ripping apart of the concept of honor on the battlefield, So, but then on the other hand, Falstaff's a rogue, right? So, that bugs me. I don't think Shakespeare presents universal values. Unless you want to say, well, yeah, it's bad to kill your wife, and Othello teaches that. But I don't really think we actually need Shakespeare to tell us that. Right. Yeah. So,
you don't need Shakespeare to tell us that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Similarly, I sort of don't love the idea of Shakespeare, but I think particularly around bardology, this idea that Shakespeare is somehow, sort of sacred, just behind, pick your deity of choice. Because I think with that comes a lot of, he somehow has these universal values, and we have so much to learn from him. Versus an author that we can we can enjoy, we can be mad at, we can wrestle with, we can disagree with, right? So there's a way in which this sort of reverence, this hyper reverence of Shakespeare doesn't give us a lot of freedom to sort of read the text, interpret them, make of them as we feel we, or to do with the text what we need to do with them. I once was at a production of Merchant of Venice, and it wasn't a great production, but I do remember someone in the audience, leaving the theater very angrily going, "This is not Shakespeare." And I'm like, well, actually, it is Shakespeare, but but I think but it didn't.
Sorry, dude. This anti-Semitism is one of those.
Well, it is, right. So, but I think this sort of idea that there's like this preconceived idea of what Shakespeare is and what it should look like and how it should be interpreted and how we should position ourselves in relationship to him. That doesn't really leave much room for us as we are as individuals.
And yeah, I mean, like, not to jump exactly on what everyone's saying, but like, I agree. Yeah, to me, it's like, and the universal values thing is actually really interesting. So I'd be curious to dig into that at some point. But yeah, I think like for me, it's like where he is positioned, kind of in society, and the theatrical canon. The theatrical canon I care a little bit less about than society. Not in general. I actually really like the theatrical canon. But I mean in terms of like its importance, because I feel like he is like I know he is used as like the cultural like standard. Like, is someone good? Are they as good as Shakespeare? That's the thing that it's compared to, which maybe not a fair comparison, but it bothers me that becomes the universal, the proposed universal, because it's not that it doesn't have worth, but it comes at the expense of reducing and kind of erasing so many other potential bards or playwrights, or however you want to look at it. Just a little bit too high up there, I think. Not that it's not good, but it's just, why only that one?
Yeah, why is it the bard instead of a bard?
Right.
Yeah.
A bard among many bards, because they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we were to zoom in on the plays themselves or the language, even details, what are some of the things that just kind of don't sit right with us today that we encounter when we dig in to the plays?
Generally women don't come across. It's not great. It's not great for women in Shakespeare, I would say. Be my one.
The disparity is a huge one, right? Yeah. And some of that is the function of the early modern playing practice, where the women weren't played by women; they were played by, the apprentices who were younger men. Yeah. So that's one thing. But sometimes the women suffer too.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm less sensitive about the gender stuff, oddly. But yeah, I mean, there's the racism and anti-Semitism that can't be assigned to a character in a play. I mean, you get plays like The Merchant of Venice that, on the one hand, it's pretty clear that Shakespeare writes Shylock in such a way as to evoke sympathy for him, and that he is critiquing anti-Semitism of the characters to a certain extent. Absolutely. And, you have Shylock declaring his humanity, what's the line? Does it do not have,
Hath not a Jew eye.
Yeah, if you prick us, do we not bleed? But then at the end of the play, it's, you kind of see where the real values of the play are. And at the end of the play, Shylock is crushed, and he is not only stripped of his money, he is forced to convert. So, and this is a comedy, right? Like, I mean, comedies are supposed to end with a restoration of social order and harmony. So, this is the vision of social order and harmony, is this, crushingly anti-Semitic move, right?
Yeah. So, sort of related to that, it's not very good to be black in a Shakespeare play.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that all the black characters die. I mean, there aren't very many, have they sort of,
right.
or about to die. If you talk about Aaron and Titus Andronicus, Othello, Cleopatra, the one black character that does live is the nameless Moor woman.
Yeah.
in
Merchant of Venice.
Merchant of Venice,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
all we know is
And
that
she gets impregnated. She was probably raped.
yeah, there's a whole question about, well, yes, because Lancelot, who is the father, makes jokes about it, ha 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 ha, right? So yeah, and this is, I think, interesting for us to think about today, but I'm also interested in the fact that, there were Black people living in London in Shakespeare's day, and this is something that, the last maybe 20 years of research have really uncovered by digging into the archives. There were Black people living in London, and I sometimes wonder, I can't know, but if you were Black in Shakespeare's audience, how would you sort of think about these characters? So
Yeah.
Yeah. And with the language itself, are there things that, even without some of these big ideas, which, we all are really unfortunately familiar with, some of the little things, like even in A Midsummer Night's Dream or things like that, like one of the things I noticed a lot in Shakespeare is the equation of whiteness with goodness and blackness with evil.
Yeah.
And so are there things that we can do about that today as we approach the plays? And obviously we're approaching them from different perspectives. I imagine as scholars working with your students, you want to dig into that and interrogate it and point it out and go, what's going on here? But as theater makers, what are the opportunities that we have depending on the circumstances?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it really depends on the context of what it is. Like, if you try to take out the racism, in some ways, is it actually genuine to what was being put forward? I think there's a question. But I like what you mentioned, right, about what is the experience of somebody in the audience. And I think that looking at it maybe academically or looking at it from a literary perspective, I think it's important to actually note a lot of the what we would view now as highly problematic stuff within it, because it reflects the time, it was not exactly, I guess it was technically post-Enlightenment, but it wasn't exactly the most enlightened time as we might look at it now, in terms of who we decided to enslave, colonize, all those things. But of its time, it does reflect that. And you can see it if you go and take a look at, say, colonial advertising, soap ads, to your point, but soap ads are very interesting to take a look at. So yeah, I think that is a problematic thing, but also when you are doing it for a live audience, it is this what is your relationship with the live audience? Not everybody coming in is oh yeah, I'm going to look at how this treatment of Shakespeare has been done in this specific production. Some people are, you guys maybe, but I think your average person walking off the street, it might be the first time they've seen it. Maybe not seen Shakespeare, but the first time they've seen that play. And so there's a question to me always about what is the audience experiencing and how do I keep in conversation with them? Because if they snap out of it, then we can potentially lose them for quite a lot. And the plots are not convoluted, so it kind of helps to maintain that connection.
So when we make changes to the language in theatrical productions, for each of you, when do you say yay, and when does it kind of bother you? And how do you think are the best ways for us to negotiate that? You've talked about it a bit, Jiv, but I'm really curious to hear you all kind of reflect on that. When you hear a play and you're like, that wasn't the word, that wasn't the line. Does it bother you? Does it
no, not necessarily.
Ease you? Does it? Yeah.
I think it depends on what they've done and how. I'm not usually sitting there, I don't have every line memorized, and so I probably don't notice most of the time. And I guess I don't, I guess mostly, if there's a good reason, if you can make a really good joke here or something, then go for it, I don't, but then I don't produce theater. So, as far as zeroing in on language, there are things that, in the classroom, I won't read out loud. I taught a sonnet course last summer, and there's a couple sonnets that I won't read out loud. I won't do in class because we always read them out loud, just because there are certain words that just, if those words are offensive, really offensive to the modern ear, just take them out. There's no reason to trigger somebody by saying a really horrible word on stage, right? And so you know, like, I mean, yeah, and if there's words that sound like horrible words, just take them out, you know, like there's other words.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not so precious that on the level of every word that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example of this, and I often listen for it, and I was listening for it in the Bard production of Midsummer Night's Dream a couple years ago, is Lysander telling Hermia, "Away, you Ethiop," right? Which is, you know, "Away, you black woman," right? Like, exactly. You know, and there's really no need for that in a contemporary production, right? Yeah. And I can't say, I don't think I've seen any production of that play in the last, I don't know, however many years that has kept that line.
Yeah.
Right? Because it does, taking, like most audiences would not miss it.
Right.
It doesn't affect the plot. It doesn't affect the action. You can insult Hermia some other way.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole insults are not great, but you know, if you need an insult, there are plenty of ways.
Oh, there's some really good ones. Yeah.
So I think, right, sort of similar, right?
Yeah.
What you were both saying is that there are things that sometimes they're just like these little lines, you know, references to Jews as well as sort of kind of off the hand, off the cuff.
Casual nastiness.
Yes, the sort of casual nastiness that's sort of said by some of the characters.
Yeah.
And not the characters who are the villains, right? These are characters that were supposed to be on the side of them, like, you know.
I mean, if there's some really good creative insults, keep those in by all means. But those aren't, you know. But I think it's really interesting what you said about Mary, about the way color works. And the thing is that that's still part of our language, right? I mean, I'm in a black mood. That's not a good thing, right? So, I mean, I especially, you really see that kind of equations of what white and fair means and what, you know, black and dark means in the sonnets. And I mean, we just spent a lot of time talking about that, right? Because like, that's a level of kind of bias that is just built into our language.
I suppose like that makes me think too, right? Like about like going back to the importance of Shakespeare. Like I see that kind of as a way that trickles down and continues to influence more and more and more literature, more and more frameworks of kind of seeing, right? Like it affects our imagination.
Yeah.
And if what we have been conditioned to learn is that like white is good, black is bad, which has been the agenda to condition us to learn that, I think that you can point to like something like Shakespeare and say like that's a source, and that gets taught in school, maybe not anymore, but that gets taught in school, you know, to like every grade level, you know.
Right.
So it affects us and therefore affects society.
Yeah.
So let's talk about adaptation now. And obviously adapting Shakespeare has been part of many cultures around the world for a very long time. So what are the kinds of adaptations that we delight in? And what are the kinds of adaptations that maybe aren't your favorites? And knowing that this is a very personal response, right? Like it's very subjective.
I think I like adaptations that actually make me go back to Shakespeare and rethink him. I think sometimes a good adaptation will say, I never noticed that particular thing in Shakespeare.
Right. Yeah.
But the adapter or the playwright or whoever has sort of narrowed in on something and sort of said, like, this is what we're going to kind of really enliven or really sort of bring attention to something that's sometimes buried or kind of buried beneath the surface. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's part. And I think a good adaptation doesn't necessarily have to bring you back to the original. Like sometimes so I don't want to sort of make that all to be a good adaptation. You have to go back to the original. But I know just because I'm a Shakespeare professor that I think for me, when I really enjoyed adaptation, I'm like, oh wow, I never would have seen that in Shakespeare's text had I not encountered the adaptation.
That made me think of something. I just read this fantastic novel called Entered Ghost, and in it, this Palestinian British woman goes back to Israel and visits her sister and ends up being involved in a production of Hamlet in the West Bank. And so I think it was just fascinating because all the politics were the context for this, and it made me think about Hamlet in different ways. So I think maybe it's not even just the adaptation, it's contexts that can really, make you see the play very differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what I would say, what I might add to that is like, it is, a lot of them at least, like are themselves adaptations. So to kind of continue that going, like Hamlet, for example, I got to see a production of the Ur Hamlet by Saxo Grammaticus, which is what it's based on. And it's very different. It's a very different show. But you can see where it comes from. You can see the connections. And so I think, like, to me, like, the adaptations I'm more interested in are the ones that are saying, okay, how do we take this, translate it to this current moment, and then also, how do we depart from it? Because I have seen, especially right now, it's kind of popular in new, because you'd call it new, Canadian theatre, to be doing classic adaptations of a lot of different works. And the ones that are like beat for beat the same show, but then maybe it's like, but this time it's Vietnamese, or but this time it's South Asian, or whatever. It's like but nothing changes.
Yeah.
It's the same play with the same character relationships. To me, it's not really well, I mean, it does adapt it, I guess, but very lightly, and to a point that I don't think adds anything. You may as well at that point just do the original and just cast it differently.
I kind of agree with you, but on the other hand, I'm also like, but it kind of just makes you think about it differently in some ways. I totally agree. In some ways, I totally agree with you. One of the things I was going to say is there's got to be a reason for this, right? But then on the other hand, sometimes just putting a whole bunch of different looking characters on the stage and giving it a different setting can suddenly make you think differently about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's about, for me, it's about like what actually changes because of that, though.
Right.
Like, so, and if nothing changes because of it, then I don't really see it as changing.
Yeah.
But if it does, then for sure,
Yeah.
you can recontextualize stuff.
Yeah.
I guess one of the, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if we're going to talk about things about adaptations we don't like, I don't like adaptations that make the play even more conservative than it was. And my big, example of that is Twelfth Night and I just recently watched a film adaptation that is absolutely terrible. But basically Twelfth Night, you see adaptations of Twelfth Night where Viola comes out at the end and she's wearing women's clothes. And Viola disguises as a boy, Cesario, through most of the play. And at the end of the play, she's still in her male clothes. And, the way Shakespeare wrote it, she is in her male clothes as Cesario while Orsino, the Duke, proposes to her, and she accepts. So what we have is the visual of two male presenting characters on the stage becoming engaged and holding hands, because he takes her hand. And and there's lots of productions will find a way for Cesario Viola to be wearing women's clothes. And it's just like, you've just erased all the queer out of this, right? So.
I guess adaptation is a spectrum, isn't it? Like, I'm really interested in how we define adaptation, because with Shakespeare almost all the time we have to cut it. Because it's just too long, and we can't fit it into what we normally would call an evening of theater. So we know that we're going to be cutting it. So does that count as adaptation? Or does setting it in an unexpected time or place count as adaptation? Or like right onto the spectrum of a completely reimagined, completely new idea of a play that might have started as in conversation with Shakespeare, or maybe inspired by, or maybe as a reaction to, or maybe even in combat with. All of those possibilities are there. So is part of it just how we define adaptation?
Yeah, maybe. Which is maybe not a definitive answer, but but like, yeah, I guess like, there's levels of it. There's like, I think technically, when you do the cut of a text, and you are making choices about what is important and what is not important, so that is a form of adaptation. And I think like setting, that stuff is a form of adapting it into a vision. But I don't know if that is changing the play. I don't know if that is actually adapting the play to now necessarily. My personal kind of thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think I was using adaptation pretty loosely because there's a way in which every production's an adaptation. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more so the works that are sort of have radically, maybe not radically, but in some way have like changed the context, have changed the language in some ways. Versus I'm thinking about a production of pick your play. Exact same structure, exact same lines, just set in outer space. You're like, oh, okay, why not? But that was the choice. Was it a justified choice? Maybe, maybe not, right?
Yeah, it's like, what did you gain from that, right? Like, what are you,
Martians.
That's a gain.
Yeah, I used to have an assignment where I asked students to adapt a play. I'm not a theater person, but it's just like a fun assignment. I did have a student who wanted to set King Lear in outer space, and it wasn't very good. I'm sorry. I said, this is interesting.
Adaptation wasn't great.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. So, it wasn't the point of the class. I gave her marks for the creative assignment, and we moved on. Like, go back.
Credit for boldness.
Yes. It was a radical new vision of King Lear.
You might want to think of it like we're at the con and see what they can put together.
Well, that would have been more interesting, but no, it was just Martians.
Yeah, okay.
Martians. Astronauts.
So I'm reminded of a book that came out in 1989, which I found incredibly inspiring when I first encountered it, by Gary Taylor, called Reinventing Shakespeare. And the premise of it, which of course 1989, that makes it ancient for scholarship, but anyway.
That was a good year.
The premise of this book is basically how successive ages have taken Shakespeare and sort of held Shakespeare up as sort of poster boy for their values. And these eras are as different as Victorian England and 60s radical revolutionaries, all sort of saying, and Shakespeare is who we're looking to for guidance. So granted, there are lots of changes that happen in that Shakespeare. I'm thinking of the help me, is it 18th century, 17th century, 18th century, Nahum Tate, and all those adaptations that, gave Romeo and Juliet a happy ending, or King Lear a happy ending. So I remember early in my career being scandalized by that kind of, tinkering with Shakespeare, but now I find it really funny, because that's kind of the kind of thing that we're up to now, as we sort of, find ways of Shakespeare, kind of, how do we mess with it? So that it does sort of reflect who we are. So I'm just interested to hear you all kind of reflect on those ideas, and what are the things that, is there a point at which it's no longer Shakespeare? And that might not be a bad thing.
Right.
What do you think?
I don't know, but I totally get you on that. I was scandalized by those 18th century adaptations now. I mean, back then, and now I'm kind of like, well, I don't know, it would be kind of nice for Romeo and Juliet to have a happy ending, But I totally get what you're saying. I don't know that I have an answer for it, but I do feel like here we are in, our modern age going, oh, we can't put this on stage, right? This is too nasty, right?
Well, I do think it's interesting because it tells us something about the sort of, that Shakespeare's plays are somehow perfect, right, and therefore, cannot be messed with. That's definitely not how people in the 17th and 18th century or 19th century even felt about it, right? That they were like, the verse is irregular here, or like, oh God, this is not what happened historically, so I got to fix it, right? That for centuries, people have been improving Shakespeare so it could be more Shakespeare. Right. So I think, this sort of idea that Shakespeare cannot be touched or improved upon, right? I don't necessarily know if Nahum Tate's Lear or Romeo and Juliet is better, right? But maybe I also just like tragedy. I don't want them to have a happy ending. But I don't know if they're necessarily better, but they were seen as better and more appropriate for the tastes the audience at that time, right? So, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? You know, like we have an audience. Audiences have certain expectations and wants, and I think now we are also, you know, in a period where we sort of recognize that we also want to make sure that, you know, productions don't harm audiences, right? That they're not sort of doing, you know, making, you know, you're not, you know, coming from, you know, seeing a, well, you personally are not being attacked by the play, right? Challenged, you know, okay, attacked, not okay, right? I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe there is a point when it's, yeah, I agree. Like, change it, like, definitely change it. But I guess maybe there is a point when it's not Shakespeare. But I guess what it's making me think of is the difference between Shakespeare, some guy, perhaps. Oh, yeah, that's right. It's fighting words. But like, so Shakespeare, like a playwright who wrote these things, and Shakespeare the idea, and Shakespeare the form. Because I think that there is a form to Shakespeare, certainly in the English world. Because you know, I've seen like non-English things, and I feel like they take a little bit. It's different because it's not in the original language anyway. But so as Shakespeare's become its own genre now. So I think that in that way, yeah, the genre. No, you can do a lot within the genre. Is it the same playwright anymore? I don't know. That maybe not.
But I mean, even when Shakespeare was alive, they were, you know, what happened, we don't even know what happened on stage, right? We have no idea what happened on stage. But there were adaptations, if you're going to call cutting an adaptation. Sure. You know, we don't really know what they did on stage.
Yeah. Or, you know, I mean, just, you know, if Hamlet is giving us any sense of what is happening on the stage, comedian, you know, that, you know, actors coming on stage like, I got the stage now. I'm gonna now steal the show, right? You know, it's like, you know, advice to the actors, like,
right.
Don't read out.
Clowns speak no more.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It tells us that they did.
Yeah,
Exactly. Right. So
exactly.
clearly in Shakespeare, yeah. So who knows what types of adaptations or departures were happening, right on the stage.
And yeah.
But I don't know what happened today if one of your actors just decided, I got my moment in this, and now I'm just gonna start ad-libbing and doing my own thing.
It goes back to, is it funny?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Are you pulling it off?
Yeah. Right.
Carry on.
Yeah. Right.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think it would be great to turn to questions from you now. But here's a request. I imagine that there are as many opinions as there are people in this room. And actually, we're really interested in hearing all of your opinions. So we don't have time to hear the opinions tonight. So here's what we have instead. Maybe even by the time some of you get home, there will be a link in your email to a survey. It's super short, super short, but it gives you a chance to tell us what you think about this event, but also about the questions we've posed this evening. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to ask, as we turn it over to Q&A, that you keep yourselves to questions for these amazing panelists so we can make the most of our time with them and save your comments for the survey. Is that cool? Awesome. We have the amazing Max Forsyth here with the roving microphone. If you have a question, raise your hand and we will hear it. Wherever you want to go, Max.
Thanks. I want to ask a question about music. Because a number of the plays have a fair bit of music in them. And often that is the piece that's cut. Because it either extends or makes things longer. So I'd love to hear your opinions on whether or not the music should be kept in, adapted, or if it actually deserves to be cut. Thanks.
Thank you. Any thoughts?
You must have thoughts on this.
Yeah, really great.
I was just going to say, I'm in favor of putting all the music back in. I mean, I don't know anything about early modern music, to be honest, but I just... music just makes it so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of the opinion. I mean, it's interesting from a museum perspective. Somebody actually did want to really figure out how it sounded
Well,
and do it.
yeah.
But I think adapting it to like, what is the intent of this song? What's the emotion that this song is supposed to carry? What is the equivalent of that we could codify today? Is a little bit more interesting to me. I mean, there's some beautiful lyrics in some of that stuff. So I'm also kind of interested, like, what if we were to take those lyrics and recontextualize it into a different genre and kind of get that feeling or sample it or something? Like, that's interesting. But I think making the music a bit more contemporary, accessible to the contemporary ear, maybe, is a way of thinking about it for me.
Yeah. Keep the music. That's all I have to say. But I think, this is an old example, but, it's the Kenneth Branagh, Much Ado About Nothing, The Sigh No More, right? And I feel like, what would that movie be without that song, right? Like, that song is just, like, it's sort of slows, it provides a sort of space of meditation. I think that the music can do that, right? Like, it's sort of, it tells its own story, but also sort of, like, allows you to sort of get the story or sort of think about the story differently, or provides a different space. So, yeah, I don't like when there's no music. But you're right, but I love the idea, like, what is the intention, right? What is the music, like, what do you want the music to do? And then finding music that allows you to do that.
Well, thanks. Who's next? Great.
Hi, I was wondering, have you ever seen or witnessed something from a Shakespeare play or from his work that radically changed your understanding of an event or relationships of today?
I think that's a tough one to answer because, nothing sort of immediate pops into my head. But then, to say that nothing from Shakespeare has ever affected my understanding of my world is absolutely patently wrong, right? So I can't think of an example, but it's not because it hasn't happened.
Now it sounds like an indictment against Shakespeare now, right?
Well, I don't want
like
it
nothing
to be.
Shakespeare. I can't think of one either. It's a really interesting question. I can think of adaptations that have, but
Like what?
there's an adaptation of Hamlet called the Al Hamlet Summit.
Yeah, I have a copy of it at home, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, by a Yemenese playwright in which Hamlet is a terrorist.
Yeah.
Right? It's sort of written after 9/11, right? And you sort of really do think about, and it really also thinks about the fact that, Hamlet has a whole lot of power still, and he is, even in Shakespeare's play, there's a lot of terror that he's inflicting on other characters, right? And it does. I think it really, I think it really asks you to think about, and it really is an indictment against the U.S. The play is, right, and it really does think about how the heroes, right, are really the villains. And I think, in a sort of wake of, the 9/11, it really did. I think it really did sort of ask you to really question the U.S. resurgence of patriotism and the demonizing of the other side, and what does a terrorist actually look like, and who's funding the terrorists, and it's interesting because it departs from Hamlet, but it really is grounded in the play still. So adaptations maybe more than Shakespeare. So
I kind of have two opposing feelings about this. I think, in a way, like, I don't think I have seen one, because I think that, like, my entire way of seeing story is so structured by Shakespeare. Like, in all narratives I see, in, like, all television I see is structured by Shakespeare, in relation to, in some way. So in a way, it's like there's no surprises, because even before I've read or seen the play, I've seen, like, 5 adaptations in, like, Looney Tunes. So I have been cultured into this in a way. So that's the one, on the one hand. And I guess on the other hand, like, if I were to point to like something that does change my worldview, yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. You know what I would say though is like what challenges my worldview often with it is when I actually this is going to sound quite conservative. I don't mean it to come across this way, but when somebody actually just does the show as the show, and it's like compelling, and that's okay too. In fact, that's maybe preferable sometimes. But like, and it's like, oh, you're not doing anything to this, and that sometimes becomes novel. Now, I think. Again, because I've watched it all in Looney Tunes form. Yeah. So to actually see the thing and let it live in its complexity and grossness and like stuff that's like highly problematic, but like it's old. It's from a very long time ago. And yeah, so in a way, like when it's done well and actually I'm connecting with it, it's like I should, everything in my being tells me I should not. But then something does. And it's like, well, that's cool.
And if I may sneak in an answer, for me, I think it's cumulative. And it's cumulative like all of the little things that I encounter, not just in Shakespeare, but Shakespeare in the minds and hearts and imaginations of all the participants in our programs. It's like a constant cumulative, oh my goodness, I never thought about it that way. Oh, that changes everything. But just like little tiny things cumulative over all of these many years from all of these different perspectives that I get to encounter. I don't know if that answers your question, but who's next?
Thanks. Good evening. I'm looking forward very anticipatorily to Measure for Measure. It's a play I haven't seen in a long time. So I'd like to know who are your good guys and who are your bad guys?
Good question.
All the guys aren't particularly good, I guess you could say. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of my feeling with it. I'm still changing, right? Like, so we're gonna have a read of it pretty soon, and then I think that'll inform a lot, and from that we'll probably change and adapt and continue that process, and we'll probably be doing it all the way till we open. Maybe not exactly till we open, but like along the way. So, but if you're looking at like who I think is unabashedly sucks. Almost all of them, almost all of the dudes. But that doesn't mean that there's not a love for them or a fascination with them, like, so one of the character descriptions we're looking at for Lucio in particular is like, he's awesome, but you don't want your friend to date him. Really fun to party with, not a good dude. And so I think that exists actually in people I know. But it's also like I see the comedy in that play about it being so lecherous, like the entire thing. So whether or not you have a moral issue with lechery, I suppose, is maybe the question. That's where I'm at right now, though. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Next question.
You've answered some of my questions already, but because of the way we posed the initial questions, we were really looking at the problems that we have with Shakespeare. And since all of you kind of make a living out of the guy, I'm wondering what it is.
May I jump in? To say that is how we're closing the evening, with that very question, Jillian. You are so brilliant. Once again, you have anticipated me. I love it. So we will close with that very question, if that's okay. Thank you. Sweet.
My question is also for Jivesh. You talked about the importance of the audience earlier. How do you
compromise, I don't know if compromise is the right word, your vision of Shakespeare to cater to a particular audience. What you're doing with the play in Vancouver, would it be the same as if you were, I don't know, redneck Texas or wherever?
Good question. Thank you. It wouldn't be the same, I don't think. Like, I've never been to Texas, so I can't specifically say, but I know it's an example. But like, I'm from the Maritimes, so like, if I were doing it in Halifax, it'd be different. If I did theater in Toronto for a long time. If I was doing it in Toronto, it would be different too. So it's a guess towards how I can pick up the vibe of a city, which since I moved here, I've been really trying to figure out. There was a pandemic, so that kind of made it a little bit harder. But trying to get the pulse of like how people communicate, what are the things that resonate with them. I mean, one thing I know even just from going city to city and doing shows in Canada is like pace is completely different. Like the way that theater is done in Vancouver is at a very different pace than in Toronto. Neither is better or worse, but it's something about how people listen. So I think what I'm interested in is like, I'm fairly new to Vancouver, so I haven't been to too many Bard shows, but I've been to quite a few still, like since I got here. And one thing I like to do is try to look, any theater I go to, I try to look at how people are listening in the crowd, as much as I can pick that up from watching. So if you ever are in a theater with me, I'm usually in the back corner watching you rather than the show. Not in a creepy way. But yeah, so I think it would be different. Yeah, I think it would be different. And if done well, it would be different, I guess. As for if it's done well, we'll find out.
Is that a problem for you? Are you compromising your vision?
No. In fact, I think it's part of it. For me, most theater, but especially like working at the scale of a Bard, right? Like it's mass communication. So it's more important for me to communicate with an audience than it is for me to like say, you're going to look at it the way I look at it. Because there's more of you than there are me. So seems like probably that's the aim.
Did you have a question? I think I saw your hand. Yes. Max can come with the microphone. He's quick.
Well, I was just going to say, for me anyway, I love to watch Shakespeare because with the historical plays, and I by no means am an authority on Shakespeare, but I really feel that I keep watching them because I see things that are still happening today politically.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes what he writes great, by the way. But I do have a question as well about this whole issue around doing harm when writing a play. Because I know there are plays that have been written that have very difficult moments in them for the audience. Mm-hmm. Do we not do that? Do we shy away from that? I'm still trying to work that out because obviously we don't want people to be hurt. But at the same time, I think there are things in life that hurt.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah, no.
really great question. So thoughts on finding the line between challenging things, which might not be a bad thing, and harm, which is not a good thing. Any thoughts on that? How we find
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about adaptation a lot, and one of the things I was thinking about was that you can't get rid of the central tension. You can't perform Othello with no racism in it. You can't perform Taming of the Shrew without gender tension and, frankly, some sexism. It's just not, when I'm talking about, well, there are words that you don't want to use. I'm talking about sort of like very particular words and very, very things that are going to jar people in the audience who, it's not going to make them think. It's just going to be hurtful, and it's probably just going to trigger somebody who already has their own experience, who knows damn well what bigotry is, right? And that's why this particular word or whatever, should not be said. But no, I mean, you can't, then we are just doing the 18th century thing and giving it a happy ending. I mean, you can't, what's the point? You have to maintain the tension and the conflict. Yeah.
I love this question.
Yeah.
Actually, I teach an article that's actually it's about Shakespeare, and it says, and the title is "Theater is Supposed to Upset."
Yeah.
Right. So, of course, sometimes you go to play. I just want to feel good play. I want to go. I want to laugh, and I want to be entertained, and I want to go home. But you're right. That theater can also be like, I've seen plays where I'm like, I almost wish I hadn't seen it because it was so hard to watch. Right. But also being like, I'm really grateful that I saw it, even though it was hard to watch, because it has brought my attention to something that I was ignorant about, or because it's sort of maybe, forced me to think about something that I usually don't want to think about. So I think, theater should or can, right, upset us, right, but productively so, hopefully, right, that, being challenged, being asked to think about, the complexities of the world, and, power dynamics and suffering, right? Like that is something that we theater should do for us. But yeah, like Rhonda, just a sort of casual assault on someone's identity, like that doesn't really.
It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't sort of lead to anything more than just that. So so it needs to do something, right? It needs to generate something beyond just an insult.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. This is something I think about a lot. There's a quote that used to be on the wall at a theater company I worked for in Toronto. And it was one of those classic theater quotes. Theater is to discomfort. When I'm looking for discomfort, rupture. I don't know. Basically, it's there to upset the people who are comfortable, and it's there to comfort the people who are in distress. And so to me, I think it's about thinking about when I'm envisioning an audience, who am I making it for? Who do I want to comfort? How am I prioritizing that? Because there's a power dynamic in that, in how we do it. An example I can use, it's not Shakespeare, but so Pandemic Theatre, my horribly titled collective, it didn't used to be horribly titled when it was founded in 2009. But we have a show that we co-produced called Daughter by an artist, Adam Lazarus, brilliant artist. And it's about toxic masculinity, misogyny, and it's done in a way where it kind of seems like he's just a nice guy and he's talking to you, and it's just a solo show, and it kind of almost seems like stand-up, and it gets really bad. It gets really, really bad, and you are complicit with it every step to the point where you can't say no anymore. And I love that show. But, there are people who don't need to see it. And so when we did it at the Edinburgh Festival, and I remember we would have the show's only 65 minutes. We'd have 3-hour audience debrief talks after every show. Because the thing is if you've experienced abuse and misogyny in your life, this show's not going to exactly enlighten you towards anything. You might recognize it and see it, but it's not going to make you go now I understand. It's actually made for the guys who don't recognize it, to recognize it and terrify them. We think of it as a horror play. I remember my brother came to see it, and it's about a father and his relationship with his daughter. Kind of, it starts there, and he has a daughter, and he is still messed up from seeing that show, which I think is good. So for me, I don't know where it is in terms of the sector and where the conversation is going with that. It's something again I stay very aware of. But for me personally, I think that's the function. I think that's for me that's what attracts me to the form of theater versus film or anything else. Because we're here and you're there, right? We're in conversation with each other, and it's not real. We all agree this is not real, but we imagine together. So it's about engaging in that conversation and making us uncomfortable. Because at the end of the day, no one's actually, like, again, it's not real. It's like if someone is portraying fascism on stage, they're probably not actually a fascist. They're an actor.
Yeah.
But it lets us see fascism and lets us kind of question that and see where it lives in us too. So yeah, I think that's, for me, that's where it is.
One thing I think, like that particular play, yeah, I'm sure there are people out there who really don't need to see this because it's just triggering. But on the other hand, it can also be empowering in the sense that it is a public acknowledgement that this kind of harm exists.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'll only push back slightly. 'Cause I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll only push back slightly in the case of, like, I have seen a lot of shows, this is not the same thing, right? But I've seen a lot of shows where it comes up and it's like, guys, did you know racism exists?
Oh, yeah, well.
Like, yeah, no.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
I'm aware.
Yeah.
So that's the analogy I would use, from my perspective.
Fair enough.
Looking at it,
Yeah.
Thank you for such a great question. So as promised, we're going to come back to something similar to what you asked, Gillian. And so after all this, you, to varying degrees, have decided to invest some of your selves, your intellects and curiosity and creativity, etc., in Shakespeare. So why? What's in it for you? What opportunities lie in Shakespeare that give you the most excitement?
Well, I have, I guess I can say something that's positive, and I can also say something that's a little bit more negative. But the positive thing, I don't know if this is sort of for me personally, but I think if we're sort of, if we phrase that question in terms of, why do we still invest in Shakespeare? I mean, I think one of the things I love about teaching Shakespeare the most is all the queer content, because, it's just so, there's just all this cross-dressing and all these men falling in love with other men and all this gender fluidity. And I think it's really amazing. It can be very empowering for students to see that history, that this exists, that this is not something we just invented, or, this has a long history.
I have there's two short answers though, but one actually goes back to something you said at the very beginning.
Good, you start up there.
Yeah,
No,
about Shakespeare not having any opinions.
Oh, okay.
And I think this is actually true, unlike other authors, and you read them, you know exactly what they think. And I think Shakespeare really forces you to figure out what you think, right? And I sort of really appreciate that about him. Like, he presents this, and he presents this, and he presents both sides, and sometimes both sides is, like, I wish you would pick the right side. But, like, no, right? Like, you're going to get sort of the complexities of different opinions and the people coming in as part of the conflict, right?
Yeah.
So I really sort of appreciate about them. The other thing I really love about him is that, the poetry is pretty good. I mean, on the level of just sort of language and metaphor and imagery, it's, he knows what he's doing. And for me, it's like when you just really sort of latch onto an image and sort of really just think about like what that image is doing within the story, it can be kind of,
I agree. Like it sounds good. Like he's pretty good at words. So that's the thing. I mean, like, as an actor, I'm not really like an actor, but like it's fun to say. Like honestly, like that is a thing. Like, you're reading a thing and you're like, oh, I want to talk this out loud, or like, so that's part of it. Selfishly, or just like, I don't know, like fascination. I go back to this mass communication thing though, because it's like if someone's going to see a play in their life, it's probably going to be a Shakespeare play. Like again, like look how many people come to Bard. It's insane. Sorry, it's not insane. It makes a lot of sense. But a lot of people pass through. And what a chance to communicate with so many people, and to communicate in something that we kind of have a touch point for. Like I think about this a lot with like classical art forms. My former roommate is a classical violinist, and so like when she is looking at doing like the slight and classical music, man, they are really specific about what's good and what's not. And she's done a lot of unpacking, and she's a much better person for it now. But what I mean is like, you have this touch point because classical forms are like, this is the thing. This is the thing, and we all know it. So that it actually provides an opportunity to showcase the individual artist more, whether that's the director, I think the actors in particular. Again, I work mainly in like new Canadian theater and stuff, and the thing is, I love it, but the thing is, it's about the playwright. It's always about the playwright. It's not, and you haven't heard the story before, and you haven't heard those words before. So there's no way to kind of look at it and assess, like, is that a good actor? I don't know. Is that a good character? Maybe is actually the question. Is that a good director? I don't know. Is that a good play? Is maybe the question. So when you're looking at these classic works that are established in some form of canon in our mind, as critical as I am as for why it's established, because I can go off on that for a long time, but it is there. So it provides an opportunity to actually showcase artistry, which we don't always get a chance to do as artists, I think, in working practically as artists, just day to day.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that excellent question. And before we wrap up, I do want to just let you know how excited we are that the 2024 season is coming up. And tickets are on sale for the public on April 10th, and members get early access. And for everyone else, you don't have to wait to buy Flex and Season Packs. They're on sale now. And then you get some early access too, which is great. So you get some really good seats. I would like to thank all of you, and I would like to thank all of my BARD colleagues and all of our volunteers. And finally, thank this brilliant panel, Jiv, Dennis, Rhonda. Thank you so much for a really engaging conversation.
Thank you.
And I wish you all a good night. We'll see you soon.